Officer Kevin Larkin had already made one full circuit of the humanities quad when he noticed the basement light under Winslow House. It was 4:47 a.m. on October 9th, 2025, and the red brick dormitory on the eastern edge of Hawthorne University in Boston, Massachusetts, should have been dark except for the vending alcove and the lobby desk lamp. Instead, a thin white bar of light cut across the service entrance. A van with university parking credentials sat idling in the loading lane. No food delivery, no custodial work order, no approved after-hours move. Larkin keyed his radio once, then stepped back when the first black Suburban rolled in through the staff gate without headlights. Behind it came two more. FBI agents in soft armor moved fast along the retaining wall, followed by Massachusetts State Police assigned to a joint trafficking task force. A breech ram hit the basement door at 4:53. The hallway echoed once. Then the building stopped being a dorm. Inside the lower level, agents found 6 cots, sedatives in unlabeled syringes, 3 locked phones on a charging strip, and a whiteboard listing student organization names beside apartment numbers in Alston, Cambridge, and Somerville. In a false ceiling above a laundry room utility chase, they pulled down passports, prepaid debit cards, and a ledger marked placement rotations. One column used campus terms: orientation, recruitment, guest host, transfer. The first victim identified that morning was not an outsider. She was a sophomore. By sunrise, federal agents would hit 5 campus-linked safe houses, arrest staff, graduate affiliates, and outside recruiters, and trace a trafficking system that had hidden itself inside volunteer clubs, research travel programs, and student housing referrals. What looked like mentorship had been converted into access, and if the documents seized under Winslow House were accurate, the university was not just a backdrop. It was part of the operating environment. The case began 7 months earlier, with a welfare call that campus administrators tried to keep off public radar. On March 11th, 2025, Boston police responded to a report from St. Agnes Medical Center after a 19-year-old first-year student, Emily Navarro, arrived disoriented, sleep-deprived, and carrying bruising on both wrists. She told a nurse she had been recruited into a leadership housing network for students who needed off-campus support. She said older students and one staff mentor arranged rides, parties, and short-term stays for visiting interns and exchange students. Then she stopped talking, asked whether university staff had been called, and refused to name the apartment where she had spent the previous 3 nights. Ordinarily, the file might have been treated as a campus misconduct issue. But 48 hours later, an MBTA transit police officer in Back Bay encountered another young woman, 21-year-old Talia Brooks of Providence, standing barefoot near Dartmouth Street with a university visitor badge in her jacket pocket and a hotel key card not registered to her name. Talia was not enrolled at Hawthorne, yet her phone contained messages from a graduate student recruiter discussing guest placement, donor weekends, and clean host apartments near campus. That overlap forced a referral to the FBI's Child Exploitation and Human Trafficking Task Force. Digital analysts extracted fragments of encrypted chats from Talia's device and matched usernames to student ambassadors, a residence life coordinator, and an employee in the university's International Programs Office. At first, investigators suspected a small escort ring using college branding as camouflage. Then the roots appeared. Ride-share receipts, bus tickets, and payment app histories showed repeated movement between Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Hartford, Albany, and Providence. 7 interstate routes, all tied to the same cluster of apartments, campus events, and student-led hospitality channels. 18 digital recruitment pipelines ran through invitation-only group chats, encrypted social accounts, alumni mentorship pages, and fake internship boards. Look closely at that shift. A student welfare complaint had just opened onto a trafficking architecture with institutional access, interstate mobility, and a recruitment engine disguised as belonging. Once federal investigators obtained search authority for 3 devices and subpoena power over housing records, the story stopped looking like a predatory clique and started looking like a managed system. The first serious breakthrough came from metadata. Photos posted to ordinary student life accounts showed the same apartments again and again, always reframed as birthday dinners, study nights, orientation mixers, or visiting scholar hosting. But hidden in the timestamps were recurring patterns. Young women photographed entering one location, different individuals leaving another, and staff-linked access cards used to open service doors after midnight. The FBI and HSI mapped those events against ride-share logs and university guest records. A network emerged. At the center were 5 campus-linked safe houses. One sat in a university-owned triple-decker in Alston, officially leased for graduate overflow housing. Another was a condo near Kendall Square, rented through a shell LLC called Ashmere Civic Partners. A third occupied a brownstone on Beacon Hill used for donor cultivation dinners tied to alumni development events. The fourth was a basement apartment in Somerville held under a faculty affiliate's cousin's name. The fifth, and most operationally important, was Winslow House itself, where basement storage had been quietly converted into a staging space beneath a functioning dormitory. And the money trail deepened the case. Treasury analysts traced $95 million in illicit revenue through tuition-adjacent nonprofits, student travel stipends, event consulting fees, peer mentorship grants, and luxury short-term rentals booked under proxy accounts. The figures did not mean one pile of cash sat in a room on campus. They reflected a broader enterprise: payments from buyers, transfers through shell vendors, recruiting commissions, interstate movement costs, hush money, and layered real estate transactions. By late summer, the task force had documented 18 dismantled recruitment channels and linked them to digital administrators operating under university-affiliated identities. Then came the corruption layer. A residence life employee altered room access records. An international programs administrator expedited guest paperwork without identity verification. A student counseling affiliate discouraged one victim from going to police and instead routed her to an informal restorative process. An athletics booster paid for apartments later used as holding sites. By September, 11 university staff members and affiliates were implicated directly or by material support. And still, investigators were missing the one fact that would convert the case from decentralized exploitation into a structured trafficking ring. Who controlled the movement schedule? That answer arrived from a confiscated tablet recovered during a traffic stop in Connecticut. On it was a spreadsheet labeled Rotation Calendar. It was color-coded by campus event, housing status, and buyer availability. This was no longer opportunistic abuse. It was logistics. The mechanism of the scheme depended on something universities produce in large amounts: trust without friction. Recruitment began with legitimacy signals. Student ambassadors invited new arrivals into private chats. Peer mentors offered airport pickups, temporary rooms, networking dinners, and introductions to donors, researchers, or internship sponsors. Vulnerable targets were not always poor, isolated, or undocumented. Some were international students far from family. Some were transfer students short on housing. Some were young women from nearby states promised career access, travel stipends, or emergency financial help. A few were not students at all, but were brought into campus settings under guest credentials that made them look like they belonged. Once drawn in, the victims were sorted. Stable housing prospects were pushed toward off-campus apartments. Those who resisted were manipulated through debt, intimate images, controlled substances, or threats that academic misconduct complaints would be filed against them. Organizers used campus calendars the way freight operators use delivery windows. Homecoming, admitted student weekends, alumni receptions, conference nights, move-in week. Each event created cover traffic. What looked like hospitality was actually concealment. Cars with university decals moved victims between dorm basements, guest apartments, hotels, and private residences where buyers had been told they were attending donor dinners, policy salons, or postgraduate networking events. Payment did not always move as direct cash. It flowed through event fees, charitable pledges, consulting invoices, cryptocurrency, and prepaid travel reimbursements. One shell entity, Fenwick Collegiate Outreach, billed corporations for student leadership programming while functioning as a laundering channel. Another, Harbor Lantern Strategies, handled apartment rents, ride-share bulk accounts, and phones issued to victims under fake emergency contact profiles. The digital layer made the network hard to detect. Recruiters rotated usernames, deleted messages on timers, and used coded campus language. Host family meant holding apartment. Placement meant transfer to a buyer-controlled location. Weekend fellows meant outside men arriving under donor or speaker credentials. By the time a victim understood the structure around her, she had often been cut off from ordinary social anchors and made to believe the institution itself would protect the people exploiting her. That is the point investigators kept returning to. The university did not function as scenery. It functioned as a credibility engine. Buildings, badges, events, and student culture created the illusion of safety, and the ring weaponized that illusion at scale. The central operator was Associate Dean Lauren Whitfield, 49, a polished fundraiser administrator whose office sat 2 floors above a student support suite and 3 doors down from donor relations. Publicly, Whitfield championed first-generation access and global exchange. Privately, prosecutors allege she used those same pipelines to identify vulnerable students, sponsor discreet housing arrangements, and connect recruiters to wealthy buyers moving through Boston under philanthropic cover. Below her sat Daniel Kim, 32, a graduate housing coordinator with direct influence over room changes, late check-ins, guest approvals, and access logs. Kim did not need to control the whole system. He only needed to know who had nowhere to go for one night, who was behind on rent, and which basement doors could be opened without triggering attention. The student-facing recruiter was Priya Sethi, 27, a doctoral candidate and orientation leader whose social reach made the scheme scalable. Witnesses said Sethi knew which group chats to enter, which anxious first years to comfort, and how to turn offers of belonging into leverage. On seized devices, her messages appeared beside transport instructions, coded placement notes, and commission splits. Then there was Martin Heller, 57, a real estate attorney and alumni board affiliate who built the Property Shield. Heller formed Shell LLCs, arranged proxy leases, and kept the safe houses legally distant from the university while operationally close enough to feed off campus life. None of them needed violence in every interaction. They had status. They had access. They had the language of mentorship, advancement, and institutional care. That was the disguise. The synchronized takedown, labeled Operation Lantern Court, began at 5:06 a.m. on October 9th, under warrants approved after a 3-week surge of live surveillance, device exploitation, and undercover corroboration. FBI Boston led the action with support from HSI, Massachusetts State Police, Boston Police, IRSCI, and Victim Services teams embedded directly into the arrest sequence. And the first targets were the communication nodes. At 5:06, digital teams entered an office suite above a bookstore in Cambridge used by Harbor Lantern Strategies. They seized routers, cloned encrypted phones, and captured active administrator sessions before remote deletion protocols could fire. At 5:12, Treasury and IRSCI served account restraints on shell entities tied to laundering flows. At 5:19, undercover officers at South Station intercepted a courier carrying 6 prepaid devices, debit cards, and a printed roster tagged for weekend transfers along the Providence and New York lines. Then the housing sites were hit in sequence. Winslow House basement at 5:23, Alston triple-decker at 5:27, Somerville basement unit at 5:31, Kendall Square condo at 5:34, Beacon Hill brownstone at 5:39. Agents moved victim first, evidence second. And at the Alston house, they recovered 2 women and one 17-year-old recent high school graduate who had been told she was staying with university hosts before an internship interview. At the Beacon Hill property, task force officers found formal dinner place cards upstairs and coded transport schedules downstairs, alongside cash envelopes and non-disclosure forms designed to look like donor confidentiality agreements. By 5:44, Lauren Whitfield had been detained at her Back Bay residence. Daniel Kim was arrested in a parking structure beneath the graduate housing office, carrying 3 master keys and a flash drive sewn into the lining of a laptop case. Priya Sethi was stopped outside an MBTA entrance near Kenmore with 2 phones wiping in real time. Then Martin Heller surrendered after agents executed a search warrant on his office and discovered proxy ownership files for properties investigators had not yet formally linked to the case. That looked like closure, but the operation kept moving. At 6:18, analysts exploiting Whitfield's tablet found a live spreadsheet showing 2 pending transfers scheduled for New Haven and Newark later that day. The question was no longer whether the Boston core had been compromised. The question was how much movement remained active beyond Massachusetts. Follow-on teams in Connecticut and New Jersey moved before noon. Additional couriers were detained. More victims were located in hotel rooms booked under conference rates. By the end of the first operational day, 32 arrests had been made, 5 safe houses were shut down, and 76 victims had been identified across the mapped network. Pause on that number, 76, in a case that had begun with a campus welfare complaint and a visitor badge in a jacket pocket. The evidence inventory ran for hundreds of pages. Agents seized 44 phones, 12 laptops, 9 tablets, 3 ledger books, and 18 active digital recruitment channels before administrators could destroy them. They recovered room access overrides, donor event guest lists, confidential student profiles, victim photographs, transit records, and spreadsheets ranking targets by housing insecurity, immigration status, social isolation, and perceived likelihood of reporting. Financial investigators traced $95 million in illicit revenue through shell companies, event consulting retainers, alumni-linked donations, apartment payments, luxury travel bookings, and cryptocurrency conversions. 7 interstate routes were confirmed: Boston to Providence, New York, Hartford, Philadelphia, Washington, Newark, Albany. The map looked less like a vice ring than a managed corridor network with Campus Boston functioning as the distribution core. The institutional evidence may have been even more damaging. Internal messages showed staff and affiliates discussing soft entries, clean placements, and quiet resolutions for students in distress. A residence access report had been altered. Guest credentials had been issued without scrutiny. Counseling referrals had been redirected away from police contact. The case was no longer about predators orbiting a university. It was about infiltration deep enough to make ordinary administrative systems perform criminal work. Then Emily Navarro later told investigators the most frightening part was not the first apartment. It was the moment she realized the people exploiting her knew exactly which professor she trusted, which scholarship she feared losing, and which dean's office she believed would never fail her. The network had studied her life before it moved on her. Another victim, Maya Rios, 20, had come to Boston from New Jersey for what she thought was a student ambassador weekend. She was given a guest badge, a tote bag, and an itinerary. By the second night, her phone had been taken for privacy, and she was being moved between apartments under the claim that donors expected discretion. She later said the campus landmarks made it worse. Libraries, banners, dorm courtyards, and student lounges kept telling her she was inside a place built for opportunity. Your parents withdrew trust. Students questioned every mentor program. Resident assistants stopped assuming referrals were benign. International students asked whether emergency housing offers were safe at all. The ring did not just traffic people, it contaminated the institutional signals young people are trained to treat as protection. In the months after Operation Lantern Court, federal prosecutors filed trafficking, conspiracy, racketeering, money laundering, wire fraud, obstruction, and interstate transportation charges against the principal defendants and key support actors. University leadership announced emergency reforms, suspended multiple programs, froze housing discretion authority, and commissioned an outside review. Those steps mattered. They were not the ending, because this case exposed a wider vulnerability. Any institutions built on prestige often produce secondary markets around access: housing access, donor access, internship access, social access, reputational access. Once those channels are weakly supervised, a criminal enterprise does not need to break in through a back fence. It can enter through the front doors, dress itself in official language, and convert ambition into a pipeline. That is why the Hawthorne ring mattered beyond Boston. It demonstrated how trafficking can hide inside systems that appear aspirational rather than overtly dangerous. No warehouse district, no motel corridor, no obvious street hierarchy. Instead, there were orientation events, mentoring dinners, staff emails, guest passes, real estate shells, and a donor culture accustomed to privacy. The architecture was softer. The harm was not. See, the numerical scale gives the case its outline: 32 arrests, 76 victims identified, 5 campus-linked safe houses uncovered, 11 university staff and affiliates implicated, $95 million in illicit revenue traced, 7 interstate routes mapped, 18 digital recruitment channels dismantled. Those are not random statistics. They describe an enterprise disciplined enough to treat students, guests, and vulnerable young women as units moving through a controlled environment. And still, the final warning came from seized planning documents, not from the arrests themselves. On a recovered drive from Harbor Lantern Strategies, agents found draft expansion notes targeting 2 additional college towns and 1 summer fellowship program outside Massachusetts. The language was sterile. The high-trust intake environment, short-cycle guest housing, affluent sponsor density. The network had not merely grown inside one university, it had developed a transferable model. That is the part experts and parents should sit with. The raid stopped the Boston core. It did not erase the market logic behind it. Wherever prestige creates blind trust, wherever administrators can redirect concern without scrutiny, wherever young people are taught that access is worth silence, the blueprint can travel. The banners come down. The press conferences pass. The semester resumes. But if institutions confuse reputation with security, the next ring will not need to invent a new method. It will only need a new campus.